There are 4,218 PS2 games, and I've got to beat every one of them. I've got to own the game because I'm playing on the original hardware, but I've beefed it up using a RetroTink 5X, some component cables, and more to come soon. Can I do this before I die of old age? I hope so. Bomberman Kart DX was published by Hudson Soft and developed by Rajan, the pronunciation of which I'm basing off of Google Translate. Apparently this game is an update from the original Bomberman Kart from 2001, which is also on the PS2. With very little information to go on, can I reach the credits to this game? When I was first looking for Japanese games to play, I thought Bomberman Kart DX looked pretty easy without having to translate too much. Even though I do use the Translate app on my phone, I was able to figure out quite a bit more than I would have had I just kind of guessed. But I was not expecting a game with kart in its name to be way more than a kart racer. There isn't just kart racing, there's a lot more to it. But let's go ahead and start with the kart racing mode of the game. Now this would be a weird one to do a journey through because a lot of these are just races. Some of the races are very similar over and over, so there's no reason to do that. Instead, let's just do an overview and then look at some of the mechanics. That way you can decide whether or not you want to play it, but also then anyone who plays this who doesn't have a way to translate it can play it and understand what's going on. Bomberman and his friends have taken some time off from blowing shit up to go to Kart Island, where apparently it's desirable to become the Kart King by winning all of the races you possibly can and coming in first in the Grand Prix. To race in the Grand Prix for Kart King, you need to finish both the B and the A licenses. These licenses are split up into 4 different buildings that have 4 different things you need to do. The first building allows you to even access the other 3 buildings. There are some challenges and a few races, and then once you unlock the other 3 buildings, you then have 3 types of carts that you need to qualify for. The heavy, medium, and light carts. Those are all just the weights of the carts that affect things like driving, turning, acceleration, top speed. Each of these has their own set of challenges and races, and once you complete them, you can then do the B Grand Prix. When you win the B Grand Prix, you then unlock the A license tests, which are the same thing. 4 buildings with the same kinds of challenges and races, and when you complete those, you then get to unlock the A Grand Prix, and when you win that Grand Prix, you become the Kart King. In between the races, you do have control of your character inside of this small kart island like town, and you can talk to people and buy carts and buy upgrades for your carts, save the game, look up information, and even do some special races that unlock special carts as long as you are willing to put up with how difficult those races are. There are 3 types of races: regular races, challenge races, and boss races, which you'll only do at the end of the game. Regular races are pretty simple. You race some AI opponents down a track, and there are either items or no items, so it comes down to having some items and skill or only skill. The racing instructions before a race will tell you whether or not there's items, but it's really never that big of a deal. I feel like skill is way more important. The items are helpful, but they're not that crazy. When you do have items to use, there are 2 colored boxes in each race, a red and a blue. The red box will always give you attack items, missiles that will hit enemies, knock them up, knock them off the track, and even do damage to their HP. And then the blue ones are support items, things like gas cans that will give you more turbo fuel, and mines to place on the track for enemies to hit as they come around, although you can hit them too. These items are pretty standard in kart games, all before this one, especially in Mario Kart, so there's nothing too crazy that we get to see here. The only interesting one, I think, is the one in the support class that steals fuel from another player and gives it to you, which is like a, 1-2 punch. You take their fuel and then you get some yourself, meaning that they can't turbo around corners as often as you can. Of the regular races, you'll have either a single race where you must win first place or a Grand Prix, where there is an associated amount of points you get for what place you get, and then you just need to get more points than your opponents, which is much more like a Mario Kart Grand Prix. You then have your challenge races, which give you a different set of challenges to complete, and when you complete it, you win the race. Some of them are things like stopping at a certain point on the track in a certain amount of time, racing around a track and keeping your speed above the designated speed it wants you to keep it above. Sometimes you need to chase an opponent down and either hit them with an item or just catch them, and several others. During these challenges, the one thing that makes them the most difficult is the fact you cannot touch any of the walls of the racetrack for any of the challenges. The second you bump into a wall, the challenge is over and you must start again. This makes it extremely difficult on some of the races, like keeping a top speed and getting around the track in a certain amount of time. You also cannot touch the walls when you are doing a challenge race out in town for a new kart. These are very special ones. You must talk to an NPC and then you will do a race. This race is just by yourself, and most of the time it's beating the track in a certain time while also having having maybe infinite turbo or something like that. But you cannot touch the walls. The second you do, you start over, and you'll be starting over a lot in that case. This is basically the entire game. You'll just be walking from building to building, accepting challenges and races until you reach the A-License Grand Prix. That Grand Prix is the mark of the last actual race. After you do the race, you suddenly have to fight a bunch of bosses. They come out of nowhere, really, steal Pink Bomberman away, and demand that you beat them in a race. And honestly, you aren't racing through a racetrack to get to the end and win. You just need to blow them up using items and smashing into them. That's it. Some of them take a maximum of about 20 seconds, because once I get a couple of the items and blast them, I mean, that's it. I'm at this point racing so well after having completed some of the hardest challenges in the game that this is just a walk in the park. It's just a formality to get to the credits. Beating the extremely easy final boss gets us credits, and that's it. Kart Racer over. After beating the game, I can confidently say the one thing you need to learn really well to win is how to drift. Obviously, anyone playing a racing game will tell you, learning how to corner your car is the best thing you can do, because this is where you're going to make up a lot of your times and beat the AI. Obviously, the AI is programmed to do things in a certain way, so if you can do them better, that's all you need. And drifting is just that thing. So when you drift, you have 4 buttons that you'll use. You'll use the gas, you'll tap a direction that you want to go, you'll press the drift button, which is R1, and you'll sometimes use your turbo. Each of these buttons is tapped because tapping is the easiest way to keep control of your kart. Tapping the direction you want to turn helps keep your control around the turn. Tapping X for gas will give you small boosts in the direction you're facing. Tapping drift will help you start the drift and get back into it if you accidentally get out of it during a turn. Say something like a very, very long, windy corkscrew turn that goes down. They have a couple of those, and if you get out of the drift, you'll want to start it back up. You probably won't be using the drift button very often in the middle of a turn, but when you do, it'll be the only thing you need to use. And then your turbo. Your turbo is kind of like a go straight forward button. If you let go of all the other buttons, press turbo, and then deactivate the turbo, you will go straight forward. This is very helpful for things like the challenges where you must not hit walls and you must take 90-degree corners, but keep your speed up. It's perfect. It's the only way to really do this, is to use your turbo to get out of the turn. So you'll press these buttons and you'll tap them during each turn, and that's really the best way to keep your control, is to tap everything. Tap right, 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 right. Tap gas, 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 gas. Just keep tapping things and you'll keep it under control. In keeping this part short, that is it. There really isn't anything else. Get good at drifting, buy some karts, buy some upgrades, do some races, and that is all. There really isn't much more you can do. Now, if you thought the kart racing was the only thing you could do in the game, that is false. There is a little bit more you can do. In between the kart racing mode, you can select 2 other modes. One of them is the normal Bomberman multiplayer, where you can play with up to 4 people. You can use a multi-tap to play with 4 real people. You can use just 2 controllers to play with 2 people and AI, or 1 person and 3 AI. There are lots of maps, lots of types of maps. You can change the rules, and it's great. I remember playing these things on the Super Nintendo a long time ago with my sister, and they were a lot of fun. The multiplayer in Bomberman has always been a good time. This one feels okay-ish, I guess. I would still say the Super Nintendo versions of the multiplayer are my favorite, but it passes, especially since this is a racing game, or so I thought. There is another mode to play, and this is not a 2 or 3 minute mode. It's not a small mode. It's not a multiplayer mode. This is a full-fledged ARPG roguelite mode. It is very similar to one of the previous Bomberman Land games. I believe Bomberman Land 2 or 3 had a mode just like this, and it came out before Bomberman Kart DX. This one is a little bit different. It looks like they did some tweaks, and they added a lot of story and different areas. So it's not the same thing. It may be the same engine, but it's not the same game. So they added this on, this whole thing, they tacked it right on, and it took me about 8 hours to beat. And I'll tell you what, I made some mistakes, and I'll explain those mistakes as I get to them. This Bomberman survival mode is almost a retelling of the kart story, as if the bosses had been there earlier. See, the bosses felt like a very tacked on part on the kart mode, but this one has the bosses coming in, stealing the Pink Bomberman immediately, and having me and the other Bomberman friends going to look for them. You can actually control White Bomberman, Black Bomberman, Yellow Bomberman, and Pink Bomberman eventually. Those characters all have their own items, armor, and equipment that they can use throughout the adventure. You do start with your regular White Bomberman, the one that usually is in all the games as the main character. And he has several items he can use in his own equipment, and each piece of equipment does different things, like the different weapons that he can use. He doesn't just use bombs, which feels very weird. He uses a boomerang and a sword. Take that in if you need to, but he uses a boomerang and a sword, and I'm going to be honest with you, I use the boomerang playing almost exclusively because it's so good. The pink Bomberman has like this magic wand. The yellow Bomberman uses the green and blue Bomberman to attack things for him. The black Bomberman has a big smashing hammer that blows up the area. It's crazy how much effort they put into this game and how many animations, like unique animations that are in this. I just don't understand. Like, I thought this was a kart game. The length of this is about the length of the kart game, which is crazy. Anyway, here's the premise. You have a town where you can go buy items and identify items you find in the dungeons. That's right, you identify items you find in dungeons in Bomberman. As you walk around town, there are some NPCs. You will find one NPC who will give you some upgrades as long as you remember to go back to him. And that's my mistake. I'll tell you what it was shortly. After you need to leave town, you go to the very first dungeon, the forest dungeon. There are 5 different doors to open, and the only way to open them is to begin at the very first door you get a key to. Every time you beat one of these dungeon areas, you get another key to progress. And after you beat the forest dungeon and beat some of the bosses there, you'll find you have access to new dungeons, all with their own unique enemies, dungeon floors, and traps. The dungeons remind me a little bit of Binding of Isaac. Only basic though. They aren't nearly as complete or interesting as Binding of Isaac. This is very open areas with a few traps and enemies just flood in and attack you. It is much more of a brain dead roguelite than anything. The roguelite part only comes into play as you're going through the dungeon and you're picking up items. Any item you pick up for equipment for your character is going to be unidentified. You need to bring it back to town. Any money you pick up will go in your pocket. But if you die in the dungeon, anything you've picked up since then drops onto the ground. I believe it's only the stuff you have in your pocket though from that dungeon. If you leave and save or just leave the dungeon in general, it will not drop the stuff that you've made it out with. That stuff is almost kind of saved in your inventory, but anything new you pick up will get lost. So you don't really lose abilities, you don't lose the equipment you have on hand, you just lose what you have in your pocket. And it is important to have the money and the items because as you move along, you'll get upgrades that you'll be able to pick up. When you're moving through the dungeons, you'll find yourself being able to backtrack to other parts of the dungeon to unlock new weapons to pick up. Let's say that I'm using the boomerang here. When I backtrack to find out this guy has an upgrade for my boomerang, it won't upgrade the boomerang I'm holding. It will upgrade my ability to pick up the next level of boomerang. So that just adds it into the loot pool. That means the next time I go into any dungeon, I have a chance to get the level 2 boomerang as a pickup. That's great and all, I suppose, but you have to do it for every Bomberman and every item they have, which is really annoying. I'm also not sure exactly how it works for the other ones. I pretty much exclusively used White Bomberman, so I never knew if I was going to be able to pick up the new stuff for the other characters. I may have to go back and backtrack in each dungeon layer with those specific characters and unlock those things. I'm not sure, but it took a long time, a lot longer than I would have liked to unlock all those things because it was a lot of backtracking and all it was just fighting the same enemies in the same areas over and over. So it's not necessarily super fun. On top of this, my big problem was not going back to town and talking to the red old Bomberman dude who will give you new abilities, and there's several. You have a couple pieces of equipment like boots and a belt you cannot pick up until you talk to him. He also gives you bags of healing you can use in the dungeons because like I said, if you die in a dungeon, you lose everything. You've got to start all over from the beginning of that dungeon and you don't get any of the stuff that you got in there last time. But I didn't know that you had to talk to this dude, so I ran around the game with no belt, no boots, and no healing vials. And that's crazy, man. I beat the game with none of that stuff. It was so hard. I'm like, the balance in this is really off. And then the last stream I did, someone came in and said, hey, why don't you have boots and a belt? And where are your healing bags? I'm like, excuse me? I'm missing healing bags and boot and belts? What the fuck is going on? So just remember to talk to this guy and then the game will be much easier. Something that I think is cool though is that on each piece of equipment, there are stats like you would imagine an ARPG to have like Diablo. It gives you stats like increased attack, increased explosion radius, increased speed, being able to see specific things on your minimap like chests or the exit or enemies. It's really interesting all the stuff they put into this little ARPG roguelike game. And it's fun. It probably would have been more fun had I been able to both read it easier because some of the translations are very off and it's hard to tell what they're telling you. And if I had gotten all of the abilities in the game, it would have been much easier. I would have survived a lot more and I probably would have gone back and done some of the other things because there is a post fucking game. If you beat the bosses, there's a big post set of dungeons you can do for more stuff to unlock. This is a surprisingly robust game mode for what feels like a secondary game mode since the kart racer is on the front of the box, but it's not. It really is a lot more to it. And the best part about this ARPG roguelike, you can have a second player. That's That's right, someone else can play along with you, probably making it easier, and both of you can pick up items and pick up upgrades and fight enemies and go through the dungeons and do the post game. That's really cool. How often do you get to say that a game you picked up has 3 separate full modes that you can play for hours and hours and enjoy and play over and over? Not many. I will say that I do recommend the game, especially for a Japanese exclusive. If you don't want to translate too much, it's not too bad to play. Alright everyone, that's the end of the video. I'm not going to make it go on any longer. Thank you so much if you're still here watching this. I appreciate it so much. Thank you everyone. Thank you everyone in the stream. Thank you for the person who helped me at the end of the stream. And again, thank you to all the YouTube and Patreon memberships and anyone on Twitch as well. If you're on Twitch on a Twitch membership, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It helps get more games to play. And again, at this point, I am only playing games everyone else has picked. So, you know, that's what we're going to do. We're just everyone who's joining in or doing stuff, I'm just going to pick and they're going to pick a game and I'm going to go get it and we'll play. So thank you. I will see you again for Lego Star Wars soon. Later.